Well, good evening. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the Southwestern Writers Collection. Please turn off your cell phones. Stop those text messages. We know how you are. LOL. Makes me LOL out loud, as Monk said. So we have everybody. Everybody has a chair. This is great. And thank you so much for coming. It's wonderful to see so many friends here this evening. We're here to all share in the launch of Land of the Permanent Wave by Bud Shrake and edited by Steve Davis. And it's the number, what number is it, Steve, in the Southwestern Writers Collection series? Uh-oh, he's on the spot. Oh yeah, count all those. This is the 16th or 17th or the 50th. This is the 17th book in the Southwestern Writers Collection series with University of Texas Press mostly. This is the last book that comes out under my editorship. I'm very happily and confidently handing that task over to Steve Davis, who's a wonderful editor and writer, and so he already has a number of books in the pipeline. So many more will be coming out in the years to come. Steve conceived of the idea of Land of the Permanent Wave probably after he wrote Texas Literary Outlaws, which is a wonderful book that many of you may be familiar with. It was about that generation of Texas writers of which Bud was a member. It also included Gary Cartwright, who's here tonight, and Larry L. King, who's not here but who's in Washington, D.C. and doing okay. Also Pete Gent and Dan Jenkins and Billy Brammer, and I think that may be it. But it was a wonderful, it was a terrific overview of that very fine group of writers. And Steve came out of that experience, I think, with a profound respect for Bud's talents in many different genres. And so he began to talk about doing a kind of a Bud Shrake reader, which this is, each piece being introduced with an introduction by Bud, and then there's a foreword by Larry L. King, and Steve wrote a wonderful introduction himself that's informative and so forth. So it's a terrific book. I hope we sell a lot of them after GW reads and after Steve introduces Bud and after Bud speaks for a moment and we have some questions and answers. Then he'll be seated around the corner along with Steve, and they'll be signing books, and so you'll all have a chance to get your book signed. I'm very happy that Joellen Gent is here with us tonight. The book is dedicated to her, and I'm just glad that she's with us. So, hooray for Jody. She's here. Where is she? Sorry, there she is. This is kind of the last big event in this space as it's now configured. Next October, we hope to see all of you at the opening of a large new gallery that will occupy this space. It'll go all the way back past the first range of shelves, and it will be not only a gallery but also a space to accommodate groups like this one, so that we can have speakers and music and panel discussions and so forth. So it'll be wonderful. There'll be new offices as well, and a new Cormac McCarthy reading room. So it's just a really it's a wonderful reconfiguration of these spaces for us, and it comes as the result of a lot of hard work by a lot of people, and it comes also from major support by the administration. We're very lucky to have here at Texas State a president who understands kind of how our mission of collecting, preserving, and making available the cultural heritage and riches of the region. She understands how that dovetails with the larger aim of the university, which is to educate and to inspire students to enable them to go out into the wider world as better and more complete citizens. And we're also very lucky tonight to have that enlightened president with us, and that's President Denise Trouth, who's here with us tonight. And we have two other staunch advocates of the collections here. That's Joan Heath, who's the director of the library. She's the Assistant Vice President for the library, Joan, and also our Vice President for Information Technology, our division head, and that's Dr. Van Wyatt. They're both here this evening. Thank you so much. And certainly, I'd like to express on behalf of the entire staff our gratitude to Bill and Sally Wittliff, who are our founding donors and also provide us with continuing guidance and support that are invaluable to these collections. So Bill and Sally are here as well. Thank you so much. There they are. And I have this wonderful staff that makes these evenings possible. They work themselves to a frazzle, and but everything. I mean, I think maybe we ate all the chocolates. Maybe, I don't know. And I don't think we even put back one box, which is a big mistake on our part. But we have Steve Davis, of course, who is the assistant curator for the Southwestern Writers Collection. Carla Ellard, the assistant curator for the Southwestern and Mexican Photography Collection. Michelle Miller, who does our publications and our media relations. All the beautiful things you receive through the mail are designed by Michelle. Beverly Fondren is our development officer. Mary Garcia is our archives assistant. Katie Salzman, who just got back from Ireland about 5 minutes ago, is our lead archivist, and Joel Miner is our processing archivist. And last but not least, also Karen Sigler is here, our cataloger. And Amy Cochran, who's our office manager and who really oversees a lot of these activities and who does an incredible job, I think, practicing up for her wedding next month, I think. So Amy's here. So I'd like a round of applause for the great staff. Thank you. It's very hard to even begin to introduce G.W. Bailey. But I'd just like to speak first about I'd like to say first that he has a connection with Texas State University because of his, because he's a Bobcat. He came back here in 1993. He got his BFA in 1994. He came back in 99, 2000 to be an artist in residence here. He trod the boards here as Dick Nixon in the Dead Presidents Club. And so he's read, this is the fourth time that he has come and to one of our events to read for us, and it's just wonderful of him to do this. I'd also like to mention that for 15 years he's done volunteer work for the Sunshine Kids Foundation, and since 2001 he's been the executive director of that organization, which provides trips and activities for young cancer patients. So he's a man of many parts, not just an actor. He's a teacher and a philanthropist as well. But he does lock his keys in the car from time to time. He started out doing stage work. Went to Lamar and he went to Texas Tech, and he worked in the Actors Theater in Louisville and also in California, where he went and did acting in San Diego also. He did Neil Simon plays and he did Shakespeare, and then he got on television and in the movies and had a recurring role on MASH as Rizzo, which many of you remember, yes, for sure. And since that time, he's just been in front of us in so many television shows. I was reading his filmography, and I don't know how he had time to do all the things he did in the 80s and 90s and 70s as well. He's been on, I have to write clues here. He's been on Chips and Starsky and Hutch and Charlie's Angels and Soap and Laverne and Shirley and Lou Grant, Happy Days, Benson. Episodes of a recurring role on Sent Elsewhere, which is a wonderful hospital show I remember, Simon and Simon and Remington Steele, Bob Newhart, and I hate to mention it, but he was also in War and Remembrance, which was which was the miniseries that beat out Lonesome Dove in 1988. No, but we won't hold that against him. He was also in a really good but very short-lived series called Undercover that was created by a Texas writer named Bill Broyles, many of whose archives are here, and it was really quite excellent. Didn't stay on for long, which I think had to do with the political situation of the time, the Desert Storm, and it was a CIA show. Anyway, he's been also on Murder, She Wrote, and I want to talk to you about Angela Lansbury later, but he's been on the Jeff Foxworthy Show in a recurring role, and in the 7 Police Academy motion pictures, which he went through way more than he should have, but maybe that was retribution for being in that War in Remembrance. I don't know. Anyway, currently he's starring as Lieutenant Provenza in a very successful police drama called The Closer, which is on TNT, which I really like. He's with a terrific ensemble cast. They've been nominated in 2006 and 2008 for the SAG, Screen Actors Guild, nominated them for the best ensemble on a television drama, and they're just really wonderful. And I kind of think of GW as being the leavening in that big loaf of bread, puffing it up. He's just terrific, and it's a wonderful show. I watch it all the time. They began filming yesterday, and I think he's not even supposed to be out of town, but he's a big fan of Bud Shrakes and a true blue bobcat, and he made his way through the storms to arrive in Austin, and hopefully he'll be able to get out before the next one rolls in, or maybe after. But it just gives me so much pleasure, and I thank you so much, GW, for coming and for reading for us this evening from Land of the Permanent Wave.
We are, in fact, prohibited from going a certain distance when you're owned by Warner Brothers, and which I assure you they do own us. But our executive producer of The Closer, I told him where I needed to go and what I needed to do, and they're our guys are very cool. And I don't want to embarrass Bud, but I told Bud what happened, and he said, you're going to do what? And I said, well, I was going to read from a new book, a collection of stuff by Bud Shrake. Bud Shrake? Little Red Book, Bud Shrake? I said, that's the Bud Shrake. He said, you know Bud Shrake? I said, I'm proud to say that I do. And so the only way I got to come is Bud has to autograph a couple of Little Red Books that Mike Abbott, because I had locked my keys in my car, Mike Abbott was kind enough to go pick up at the bookstore. So, but they are for, if you watch the credits, it's for Mike Robin, who happens to be a scratch golfer. And I swear I thought he was going to tear up when I told him I'd get an autograph. Well, we're about to see why people love this man so much, and his words. Cops eat kid's pet. Texas Observer, July 25th, 1975. This is Bud's intro. It was a dirty old building with exhaust fans that blew clouds of black soot on hot summer days, in a time when reporters wore white shirts and neckties. Prostitutes worked the narrow alley between the press and a ramshackle hotel called the New Gym, where Delbert McClinton was playing at a black jazz club as a white boy, barely 12 years old. On Saturday nights, printers in the back shop of the paper would peer across the alley and into the open windows of the bedrooms on the second floor of the New Gym, where romance was usually in the air. Nearly every hotel south of 10th Street was a walk-up whorehouse, bookies with names like Circus Face, Little Mac, and Puny the Stroller operated openly out of bars where it was illegal to serve a mixed drink. So, if you stopped in for a drink, you brought a whole bottle in a brown paper bag. There were so many slot machines and pinball machines that Gangsters from Dallas tried to move in and take over, setting off a war of shootings, strangulations, car bombings, bombs planted in mailboxes and under telephones, and even bombs dropped from Piper Cubs. Preachers and civic leaders accused us of tabloid excesses in the vivid stories we published at our dingy domain at 5th and Jones Street in Fort Worth. But the fact is, we didn't tell half of it. The article. I never saw the books, but I never doubted that the Fort Worth press was on the downside of broke. They told us that every day. You had to turn in an old stub to get a new pencil. Sometimes you would go to the back for more copy paper to write stories on and find stacks of it cut into the shape of pennants, reject stuff. But if you rolled the paper into the typewriter with the pointy side up, it taught you to write a quick, crisp, Scripps Howard-style first paragraph. Preferably no more than 4 short words like, "Help," cried the Queen. The pyramid idea of how to write a news story, punching it at the top and broadening it as you went down, became for us as much an obligation as a device. But those things made us search for glamour in the dirt and outright stinginess of the place. And we worked to produce stories that were in their own class great. By that I mean news stories that were ingenious and diligent pieces of reporting with a fair amount of accuracy under the conditions. Even stories that were dull, like and ordinary, except to the victims, like traffic fatalities. One could occasionally turn into a front page lead for the street edition with a headline that said, "Blind Evangelist Mourns Hit and Run Baby." Some of the stories we did could hardly be justified except as tabloid show business. I interviewed a woman who had raised a 7-foot hollyhock and detoured this event into a whole press page of creepy fiction. One Saturday night, on the police desk, I was called by the city editor, Mac Williams, bless him, whose notion of the perfect lead would have been, "Jesus wept." If you could just cut out one word in there someplace. And told to go out on the north side and talk a woman out of killing herself. She had phoned up the paper, as do a lot of lonely people, and laid her tale on Mac. For me, to go to the north side meant leaving the police beat open for a couple of hours, and I argued. And I went. Down a dirt road was a little frame house with 3 junk cars in the yard. I knocked on the door. A dog crashed through the screen and bit a rip in my pants. In those days, we wore suits and ties and snap-brim hats on the police beat as to pass for detectives. And I kicked that dog about 18 feet through the living room into the kitchen where the dog slammed his head against the refrigerator and commenced howling. An old man with a shotgun stumbled out of the bedroom and said, "That's the one that wants to kill herself over there. It's not Spot that he wants to die." On the couch, a woman lay in the heap of gin bottles. I nudged her and asked if she wanted to kill herself. "Bet your goddamn ass," she said, and went back to sleep. "Nearly every Saturday night she says that," explained the old man. I drove to a gas station and phoned Mac and said if the woman killed herself, I would hear about it back at the police beat, where as it happened, I should have been reporting about a local gangster who had just been blown up with a bomb. Sunday morning, I picked up the paper and saw my byline with a big headline on it that said, "I saved her from sure death." We were trying to sell newspapers, and there was a theory that that was how it was done, although that theory seems not to have proved out in Fort Worth. If there wasn't a tornado, we could dress up with a big front page headline, never mind that the tornado was in Oklahoma, and we could find a banger of a first-person story that was supposed to grab people at the news rack on their way out of the office, the press being an afternoon paper 5 days a week. Or we would twist a small event into an jack-o'-rama, like when a policeman ran over a deer in Trinity Park. Not knowing what else to do, brought the carcass down to the station, where the deer was slaughtered and handed out as venison. The policeman didn't know who the deer belonged to. But anyhow, it appeared in the press as "Cops Eat Kids' Pet." Letter, April 10th, 1963, from the navel of Mother Europe to Dr. Billy Lee Brammer, Senor J.D.L. Milner. Dear El Senor and Mr. Doctor, I finished my new book, But Not for Love, the other day and got the last part of the manuscript off to New York so they can start printing up hundreds of thousands of them. And then I decided I better start on another one so the devil couldn't slip into my idle workshop. You know how I feel about the devil. I've read in the papers where the Anglicans are doing away with hell, which should make us all feel a lot better. But they may not get it done before all my ailments fetch me over the brink. And I want to keep the devil at a standoff. Anyhow, work is the way to do it. And as Paul Gallico told me down in Antibes, if you're going to work, you ought to make money. First thing I want to tell you about is my visit to Gallico. I just come from Rome, where them Italians breathed all over me and gave me a terrible case of the paranoia, and a middling case of the angst, and also a rattly cough. And it was raining when I got to Nice. I checked into a hotel near the railroad station and phoned Gallico, as I had been instructed to do, via a letter from Gallico, who wrote at the urging of Ken McCormick and Adela Rogers St. John's. So I phoned him, and he couldn't remember who I was and put me off. That didn't bother me a hell of a lot, and I didn't blame him, and I forgot it. Early the next morning, he called me and apologized and said, oh, now I remember, and can you come for lunch? I did, on the electric train that goes up and down between Monte Carlo and Cannes. Gallico has a 16th century house in Antibes, right on the water. There's a big horseshoe bay from his living room, and the balcony on the 3rd floor you can see across the blue water all the way to Monte Carlo, with Nice about midway, and the old forts and fishing boats and mountains. You can see even past Monte Carlo and see the snow peaks of the Italian Alps. From the other side of the house, you can see Cap d'Antibes and the villas. I was thinking what a great house it would be to have a party in and how we could wreck it in one night. Gallico is a big guy, a little bigger than El Senor Milner, and looks younger than he is. He must be 60 or so, but his hair is still full and brown, and he looks 40. A tall woman with an expression of smelling something bad came in, stuck out her hand. This is the Baroness of Liechtenstein, said Gallico. I didn't know whether to kiss her hand or bite off her finger. But she grabbed me and gave me one of those quick, hard pumps that the Europeans use for a handshake. Gallico lives with the Baroness, or maybe it's vice versa. And she can't get a divorce from the Baron, but they get on swell. We all sat down to talk and had a big lunch with wine served by servants. Gallico dictates everything to a secretary who then types it on an electric machine big as a phonograph. He said he used to type until a few years ago he got a pinched nerve and couldn't use his hands. You better learn to dictate because bending over a typewriter will give you a pinched nerve, he said. Gallico likes to talk. He asked me if my book could be serialized in post, and I said no. He asked why, and I said because it is smutty. He looked a little irritated. I had dosed up on heart medicine and had a hard time keeping up from interrupting him and making several speeches of my own. I wanted to tell him that we didn't look at things the same way a bit, but I manfully kept fairly quiet and ate his roast pork and drank his wine and listened. Then he and the Baroness drove me back to Nice. He said he was in Dallas a few years ago to do a Rediscovering America series for Reader's Digest. He said Dallas was great. I said it was in danger of being very crappy. We said farewell, but he was, through all of it, very nice, gentlemanly, much more so probably than I would have been if I was having my day wasted by someone I didn't know. As I said in Rome, them Italians had given me a terrible case of the paranoia, and then I went on to Barcelona and it didn't get much better. So I went to Paris. I fell in love with 4 identical midgets and got passing out drunk on Fumador, which cost 99 cents a quart in Barcelona, and wandered the streets yelling like a madman and got Billy Lee's letter. Billy Lee had a suspicion that I had sneaked some literary talk into a letter to him, and he was right. It was the result of the symptom of oncoming paranoia, which the Italians finally give me. I got some blessed medals, which I am bringing you. Medals of St. Jude, the saint of hopeless causes, who should be the patron of all of us. I have worn a Jude for years. Joyce spotted the hopeless cause in me long ago. Now I've got some blessed ones for all of you. Rub them when your child support is due, or when you realize it's 6 a.m., when you start to work, or when you're out of heart medicine, or on hundreds of other occasions. You still get screwed, but you survive. My book came out 466 pages of MS, and I did it in 52 working days. There were 20 other days during the interim from start to finish when I didn't do a damn thing, mostly in Rome. And even if it's not worth a shit, that was a lot of work for me to have did. I am proud that I did all that work while I was busy falling in love, especially with the 4 identical midgets. I got to looking through the carbon, and it nearly made me throw up. But anyhow, Doubleday is going to publish it in the end of October, and we can have a mass throwing up. One big trouble was, I noticed there's no Indians in it. That's the thing about heart medicine. Here I was going along furiously and finishing, and then I found out I'd left out the Indians. What kind of goddamn book is that without Indians? I will lose my reputation that was so dearly earned and so cherished. But I have lost other stuff. I am rubbing Jude. The Kennedy Motorcade, from Strange Peaches. I had trouble starting the Morris Minor and feared I might miss the motorcade, but the engine finally caught and the radio came on. Because of the cleared weather that caused me to stop and roll up my sleeves, the bubble top had been removed from the president's black Lincoln, the radio said. Plenty of Dallas cops had been at the airport where the president had touched hands with admirers, and hundreds more were spotted along the route, a map of which had been printed in the newspapers, where the 300,000 people were waiting to see the Kennedys ride past in the open car with Governor Connally and his wife and Lyndon Johnson riding a few cars behind. I drove fast and parked the Morris Minor by the Texas Pacific Railroad tracks on Pacific Street in a brown brick warren of warehouses. As I stepped over railroad tracks and around boxcars, I saw a few people sitting on loading platforms eating sandwiches out of paper bags, but most of the workers had gone over a couple of blocks to Dealey Plaza to watch the president. The sidewalks at Elm and Houston beside the school book depository building were crowded, and I didn't immediately see an opening in the crowd across Elm and Dealey Plaza, so I trotted on along Houston to Main Street, going past the criminal courts building, looking for a view for the Bolex. At the corner where the cars were to turn north off Main and onto Houston, I squeezed among people at the curb as I heard cheering and the motorcycles coming amid a roar that boomed toward me along Main like the roar of a football crowd. People flinched back from me, but it didn't matter. I leaned out and saw the motorcade approaching very close. First the motorcycles, and then a pilot car of cops, and then 6 more motorcycles, and the white lead car with the sheriff and the police chief and the Secret Service boss. And finally, 4 or 5 lengths back, came the black Lincoln. Through the viewfinder, I saw Connally's wavy blue-silver hair. Mrs. Connally was the other jump seat, hidden from me. Now I found John F. Kennedy. He was on the side of the car nearest the curb, his eyes crinkled and puffy underneath, an arm on the rim of the open car, shirt cuffs showing, wearing a dotted necktie, looking at the people along the curb as they applauded and called out to him. Kennedy was smiling, a very good smile with very white teeth, and his wife was smiling almost the same way, but without as much heart in it. His hair looked thick and healthy, and his face was tanned, and his eyes were clear, and seemed to be enjoying what they saw. I was struck by how much like a movie star he looked. What an air of ultimate celebrity there was about him, everything put together exactly right, and a good heart showing from that smile and the eyes, with his wife sitting there beside him, trying to smile in the same manner. She had the look of celebrity too, but more distant from the people and from life. A movie star smile that was like a fence between her and the crowd. Where her smile said, "Keep away, I'm doing all right," his said, "We've got it going, and I love it all." They both looked as if they had been made up for the cameras, whites of the eyes sparkling, teeth polished, skin tinted copper, grander than the rest of us. But his face shone with intelligence and humor that broke through the celebrity mask without apology for the mask itself. As the car pulled abreast, I didn't want to see him through the viewfinder, but the movie might require this vision. I lifted the camera, and the president's gray eyes looked directly at me, leaning out from the curb, took me all in with an instant's deep gaze, and looked squarely into my lens, and his lips moved a bit, the smile broadening, and he raised a finger and pointed it at me. And I took my eye away from the viewfinder and looked straight into his eyes. And a communication flashed from him to me that said, "There you are, you freak. What a time you must have among these people. I like you for it. Don't give it up." At the same second he was sending me that message, I was receiving it and thinking as well, with surprise and embarrassment, that I would have such a thought, that if I'd wanted to hurt the man, I was so close I could crack his skull with a 5-iron or couldn't conceivably miss with a pistol. But I could tell this was perverted thought, and it never reached him. He had trained himself to tune out small paranoias. I smiled at him as he looked at me, and his right eye squinted very slightly, as if it occurred to him that he had seen me before, but could not recall where. Then his eyes left me and held their place in the crowd that was moving past the car, and he said something to his wife, and she looked back, smiling with the flowers in her arms. But our eyes never met. And then the black limousine was going on down the road, and I was looking at the back of the president's head. I didn't wait to film Lyndon Johnson or any of the others. To me, they were just politicians, not great men, just part of the crowd, the same as me. And I still didn't care for all this big-ass politics, but I knew a great man when I saw one. Reflecting on the sensation of having connected in a mental relay with the president, and repeating to myself, "There you are, you freak," I ran and caught up with the car as it turned onto Houston Street. I flipped on the long lens and got the Lincoln in my magnified sight again at the motorcade, turned once more onto Elm at the red brick depository building, and started down toward the triple underpass and the railroad trestle. Pop! I knew it was a rifle shot. The sound is so common as to be quite distinctive. Later, many said they thought it was a firecracker, or the popping of a paper bag, or a backfire, but I knew at once that it was a rifle shot. And I heard myself moan as I looked through the viewfinder and saw Kennedy raise his hands toward his throat, and Connolly starting to turn back toward him. Pigeons flew up from the depository building. The car kept moving, slowly. I was expecting the car to leap ahead and disappear through the underpass, but it moved so very slowly. Pop! The car had passed an oak tree, and now people were screaming and had begun running around in Dealey Plaza, and the pigeons were circling in the sky, and cops in helmets on motorcycles were looking back and forth, wondering where the shots were coming from. Through the viewfinder, I saw Connolly sliding down and Kennedy leaning to the left toward his wife, and the black Lincoln almost seemed to be stopping, edging down from a slow motion into stop frame. "Go on!" I cried. "God damn you, go on before they kill him." Someone shouted in my ear. I kept my finger on the button. I was waiting for another shot. The first two shots echoed through the plaza, bounced off the county jail and the depository, caroming around the plaza, and people were running, falling, dodging, throwing themselves into the ground as in war movies. On the grassy knoll, I saw figures scattering, and Kennedy continued to lean, and the creeping, linking pop! Pieces of skull sailed out of Kennedy's head. A red spray flew out, as if a stone had been thrown into a pot of tomato soup. "No! They've got him now!" I yelled. At last, the car moved. As the president's wife began scrambling out the back of the car, out of this blood and madness, at last the car moved forward, carrying its passengers too late down into the underpass. I knew. he was dead. Letters from New York, 1964, 1966. April 10th, 1964. Bud's intro. And I did become a partner in an art gallery in Austin. It was called the Gallery Goo. It was supposed to be Gallery 600, but the lettering on the sign was a little off. Fletcher Boone was the proprietor and resident artist. Financially, it was a flop, but that was to be expected. Another partner in the gallery was Ann Richards, who eventually became governor of Texas. Reading this letter, I have to laugh at the date. I had only been in New York for a month. Already, I was looking in other directions. Poolsy-palsy, a serious suggestion. We have reached the place in our lives when we have to decide what is important to us, what we truly want to do and what we do not want to do, what matters essentially and what is essentially crap. Not only because we are getting older, but also because the world is getting older. The Chinese are making a bomb, the blacks and yellows are in revolt in Africa and Asia, God is stirring, all that, everything. But mainly we are getting older, and why use up our lives in futile grabbing for status and money that neither of us really wants? Why follow the pattern they lay down for us? Why bust your ass in something you do not really feel worthwhile merely so your child or children can grow up exactly as you did and get into the same chase and feel the same discontent? We have both been moderately successful in what we do. We are making pretty good money and have pretty good jobs. In my practical field, I have one of the very few very top jobs in the country. But it's not satisfying. Of course, I work on novels, and that can be, I hope it will be, the ultimate satisfaction. And I hope to wrangle around with a couple of deals and escape New York. But if I can't get those deals and can't make enough money by writing novels, then what am I going to do with the last 30, luckily, years of my life? Among money earning possibilities, the only things I care about are bars, books, and paintings. So, why not open a bookshop, art gallery, coffee house? It would, of course, have to be in a place we like. I would say either Austin or Santa Fe. In favor of Austin. Austin is close to Mexico. Austin has the lakes. And I would like to keep roots in Texas, since if I am ever any kind of writer at all, it will be as a Texas writer, I think. Legendary friendship between Bud Shrake, Larry L. King. This is one of thousands of correspondence between them. A letter to Larry L. King, January 7th, 1978. Bud's intro. I spent the best years of my life trying to get a statue of Larry L. King erected in a prominent public place, or actually in any place at all. After repeated failures, I was fired from the statuary committee. The silver lining to that cloud is that I was able to sleep late from then on and stop begging for money from strangers who had never heard of Larry or thought he was the guy with the talk show on television. The movie I'm talking about in this letter became Songwriter. Dear Professor King, I have tried to phone you several dozen times over the past few weeks in order to inform your ass that we are hard at work on the big, fine statue of you that will stand on the site where I discovered the East Pole. We are following your drawing of what the statue would look like as closely as possible. I mean the 14-inch waist, Wilt Chamberlain's cock, and Henry Fonda's face have been no particular problem. But our stonemason keeps misspelling intellectual in the carving at the base of the monument. He got trick fucker in upside down, which he claimed is the only hep way to do it. I hear now that the reason you never answer your phone is you're 1, too famous, 2, too rich, 3, busy singing and reciting on the stage, 4, getting married, 5, busy making Bobby Baker famouser, 6, stoned, 7, degenerated beyond human help, etc., etc. Anyhow, I have heard from folks who have saw your Broadway show, and all I have heard from claim to like it very much. This is dangerous, as us writers know. The Hollywood people on the Killer Bats movie claimed I have wrote the near-perfect script, and they love me to nub as a person, which is why the producer had his secretary call me up and fire me off the movie on Christmas Eve, thus jacking me out of the $50,000 bonus I would have got had I been the only writer employed on the movie as of March 1st. But that are showbiz, Professor. Now it looks like I'm writing a script about country music, a original, as we say, that Willie and Waylon are putting up the front money for and are going to star in along with Mary Kay Place and Dennis Hopper. Jackie Jack got mad and said, count him out. I think he'll come back in. I've been with Willie and Waylon for more than a week now here and in Houston. Willie has blowed my brain, to use the Hepcat phrase, and Waylon's personal conduct makes Jackie Jack and Hopper seem pretty calm. I got to go now to other daily big deals, but I want you to know I got lots of little tiny midgets putting together your monument pebble by pebble, just like they built the Sphinx. A scene from The Big Mamu, February 1986. Bud's intro. Jonathan Demme is an important director, a wise and big-hearted man, and good company. We developed The Big Mamu together, inspired by a nonfiction book by Jim Konetka of Austin called City of Fire. Claire Townsend at 20th Century Fox, the executive for the project, was a dear friend and totally simpatico with us. David Axelrod and Ed Pressman were to be the producers. The angle Jonathan and I had on the story was that a bunch of very young, brilliant, and bizarre characters gathered on top of a mountain in Los Alamos and, working literally with screwdrivers and adding machines, managed to build a bomb that would change the world forever. The more I learned about Fermi, Teller, Bohr, Oppenheimer, Groves, and the rest, reading their own books, the more remarkable the situation became. Fermi spoke English like Jimmy Cagney, having learned from the movies. Teller played the piano all night in the crude barracks shared by the scientists and their families with a belching potbelly stove. Saturday nights, the eggheads gathered in the lodge and got drunk on grain alcohol and put on dances and theatrical skits and drag. Pueblo Indians came to watch and dance with them. These were young people, and there were many sexual affairs. It was no secret that Kitty Oppenheimer, wife of the chief egghead, enjoyed sitting on the porch of her cabin nude in the dusk, having a cocktail and waiting for him to come home. Driving to the first big atomic bomb test at Trinity, a carload of the top eggheads blew a tire, stranding them in a desert saloon since there was no spare tires. Earlier, a physicist was lit up and killed by radiation when his screwdriver slipped. President Roosevelt speaks what I saw as the point of the movie when he says is an ironic joke on Darwin that we are busily evolving ourselves out of existence, using the most brilliant of our people to do the dirty work. This idea was not popular in the top office at Fox. We were told the atomic bomb was not the subject for black humor. Demme and I protested that the black humor was in your point of view. The details of the story were as true as a documentary. Nevertheless, out on the sidewalk we went. On the way to the Trinity test site. Exterior, Belen, New Mexico, Roy's Cafe, day. A Ford sedan stops in front of the cafe. The driver jumps out and opens the doors for Oppenheimer, Groves, Teller, and Fermi, and for Colonel Buddy Montana, head of public relations for the Department of War. As the men step out of the car, the left rear tire goes flat with a loud hiss. Driver, they wouldn't give me a spare tire at the motor pool. I told them who my passenger was, and they didn't give a damn. Groves, stay out here and hitch us a ride to Trinity. The five men enter Roy's Cafe, leaving the driver to wander to the edge of the road, which stretches off empty as far as the eye can see. Cut 2, interior, Roy's Cafe. Groves, Oppenheimer, Teller, Fermi, and Colonel Montana are drinking at the bar. The bartender is an FBI agent, dressed to look like a Mexican. But the bulge of his shoulder holster is unmistakable. Groves, you eggheads don't understand the public mind. We've got to have press releases today. Listen to Colonel Montana. He's a specialist in snookering the public. Colonel Montana, well, I wouldn't call a public relations game snookering the public, but people are going to know something very big happened out here, and that's where I come in as chief of PR for the Department of War. Fermi, I can dictate your press release. Teller, what would you say? Fermi, a pause. A huge meteor struck New Mexico this morning and blasted the shit out of the whole state and all its citizens. Hunters and skiers planning to vacation in New Mexico, be advised. It is now a crater and too hot to touch. Colonel Montana digs in his portfolio and brings out press releases. Colonel Montana, in fact, I do have a press release describing a celestial body smashing into New Mexico. I have prepared press releases to explain a total fizzle, a small embarrassing foop, a major explosion such as we hope for, the destruction of the state of New Mexico, the destruction of the western United States. If the atomic bomb goes off bigger than that, well, to hell with PR game, frankly, gentlemen. Teller, I'd make it 35 to 1 we don't blow up New Mexico. 1,000 to 1 we don't blow up the whole world. The FBI bartender is leaning close to listen. He looks aghast. Oppenheimer, the press release could say, even though the odds were 1,000 to 1 against them, the most brilliant men in history managed to obliterate the planet Earth today. The FBI bartender drops a beer mug on the floor. Angle. The driver opens the screen door. Driver, I got your ride to Trinity. The men toss dollars on the bar and go out. Fermi looks back at the FBI bartender. Fermi, hey pal, if I was you, I'd dig a hole about 6 feet deep. Fermi laughs and follows the others. The screen door slams shut behind him. And one more letter between these great friends. February the 12th, 1998, to Larry L. King on Getting Older. Dear Your Holiness Lionship, in these uncertain times of anthrax and Saddam and the Pacific Rim financial genius turning out to be mainly another variation of the SNL scam, I want you to know you can count on your clipping service to send you glorious views of your own self and kind of pissy views of pals, such as this brief essay on Willie's new book. This makes twice again Willie has fooled me. I used to believe everything he said, like when he told me his dog Pete jumped out of a 6th floor window in Gotham and landed on his feet unhurt. A year ago, he told me he had a new book called My Dog Skip. I didn't believe that until I saw him signing them in a tent at the book festival in Austin. Then he told me he had written a new book about the making of the movie The Ghosts of Mississippi. I thought, surely not. As we know, Professor, everybody who has been intimately connected with the making of a movie thinks there is a book to be written about the experience. And they're right. But the books are pretty much the same and usually turn out to be lesser works even than the movies they describe. And also, almost nobody gives a shit about the writer's experience on the movie unless it is a tell-all book about sex with glamorous stars of both sexes simultaneously. But here is The Ghosts of Medgar Evers. And Jap's book, exposing all of us as drunken dope fiends, is due out next soon. The Gov tells me. Jap never mentions it. I don't ask. I have just finished a line edit and a scribble in the margins rewrite of the first 531 pages of my epic. I think I have about 100 pages to go. McMurtry has come out with 2 novels since I started this epic. And his new one, Comanche Moon, is 750 pages of print and a large-sized book. Makes my epic look like a novella. Turning 30 hit me only in a romantic poet sort of way, since we were all supposed to die pretty soon or else publish a major literary sensation. Turning 40 and 50 didn't hit me at all because I was too drunk to notice. I was sober at 60, but couldn't really comprehend it. Turning 65 definitely caught my attention, though it was only days before I was suddenly 66. I still don't believe the numbers. I think I am about 40 now, though the mirror disagrees, and my social life is certainly different from what it was at 40, when we stayed up all night and were incredibly charming. Yours in Christ, Bud Shrake.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Davis, and I feel pretty silly introducing Bud at this point, since I think most of us have a good idea of who Bud is, but if you can just dial back your knowledge a little bit, I'll try to do what I can. When I think about Bud, one of the pieces in this anthology is called The Best Kept Secret in America, and it's about the city of Austin back when it was still a groover's paradise. And I think that title, that whole idea of being one of America's best kept secrets, really applies to Bud, who, for all of his strengths as a writer, has never really received his just due. And I think part of the reason for that is because Bud's personal life has been so extraordinary. One of the reviewers for this book, Ben Fountain, noted that Shrake seems to have packed about 6 lifetimes worth of living into one. And early in his reporting career, very early on, Bud witnessed a white riot in the wake of the Brown v. Board U.S. Supreme Court decision. And then a few months or a few years later, he spent a day as Muhammad Ali's chauffeur. And Bud was driving the Cadillac convertible when Ali decided that he wanted to investigate a riot in Houston. And Bud did need a little help from the champ escaping from that one. And Bud has also had a hand in naming the Dallas Cowboys. He hired Frank Sinatra to photograph a boxing match for Sports Illustrated. He hit on Gina Lollobrigida in a New York bar, not realizing who she was. He was briefly a political prisoner in Argentina. He was the longtime significant other to Texas Governor Ann Richards. He was playing golf with Willie Nelson the day the IRS decided to stage its raid. And back in Dallas in 1963, Bud was partying with the right-wing oil millionaires who sincerely believed that communists were transmitting radio signals into John F. Kennedy's brain. And at the same time, Bud was dating Jack Ruby's star stripper. And in fact, he received a visit from Ruby the day Kennedy was assassinated. So with a life like that, it is easy to sort of overshadow your writing. And through it all, Bud has kept very busy writing for newspapers, for Sports Illustrated, movies, novels. But he's never had the blockbuster novel or the blockbuster movie that many people felt would come to him at one day, and that's where you get into this part of him being kind of a secret still in some ways. But Bud did end up with the nice consolation prize, which is co-authoring Harvey Penick's Little Red Book. And along the way, Bud has earned a reputation as a writer's writer. And I want to talk just a minute about this idea of what being a writer's writer means, because to some people, I think it means that you're a difficult writer in some way. Like an architect's architect might design a building that doesn't have a front door or something like that. But many of us here do know already that writers, above all, are very good readers. And so when you have the respect of other writers, it really does mean something. And I think it's instructive in this regard to consider the opinion of legendary Harper's editor, Willie Morris. And during his tenure at the magazine, Willie published Norman Mailer's On the Steps of the Pentagon, which won a Pulitzer Prize in book form. He also published Seymour Hersh's Me Lai story, another Pulitzer winner. And also appearing in Harper's during that time were William Styron, Truman Capote, Donna Tartt, Robert Penn Warren, Larry L. King, David Halberstam, and many others, including this story by Bud called Land of the Permanent Wave, about a trip through East Texas in a big thicket. And Willie Morris wrote later that Bud's story was one of two pieces among many that gave me special pride. Shrake's story struck a chord in me that I've never quite forgotten, having to do with how clean, funny, and lambent prose caught the mood of the moment in the country and mirrored with great felicity what we were trying to do at Harper's. To me, few finer magazine essays have ever been written. Willie's comments about Bud's were published in Willie Morris's memoir a few years ago, so they're reasonably well known. But I want to take you all back behind the scenes here to our archives, because we have a lot of great stuff there that Bud has donated his lifetime of his writing archives. And working with this material, we like to sort of take the high road and talk about the successive manuscript drafts and how you can study the changes and things like that. But the real fun really is reading people's letters. And we have a great number of letters from Bud, as GW mentioned, hundreds and hundreds between Bud and Larry L. King. We've gotten some interesting letters in the archives that Bud's received from other writers over the years. I just want to share parts of a couple of these with you. After Bud's 1962 novel, But Not for Love, was published, Herb Wind at the New Yorker sent him a letter saying that the book recalled for me something of the mood and the shape of Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. You have a great deal of talent, Bud, and I have a feeling that as fine as this first book is, you will go on to do some really outstanding things in fiction. That's the book that Bud said earlier that made him feel like throwing up when he read the manuscript. And another letter in the Shrake archives is from Gay Talese, who was responding to a chapter of Blessed McGill that was excerpted in Sports Illustrated in 1968. Talese wrote, "I just finished reading The Buffalo Hunt from your new novel, and I am very, very impressed. What got to me was the drive of the underwriting, the simply told tale that builds as it goes, a really successful piece of work. Humor, too, and that fantastic knowledge of hunters and the hunted. You have a lot going for you, and I wish you well with the book." And I'll just read one more. This is from David Halberstam, reacting to the publication of Strange Peaches in 1972. Halberstam wrote, "As you know, I thought Blessed McGill was one of the 2 or 3 best novels of the last 5 years, and I think Strange Peaches is even better. More ambitious, funnier, wilder. It seems to me that you have reached very far and pulled it off." I think one of the things that you'll see in this book is that Bud's writing from 40 years ago retains its vibrancy, its immediacy, and its relevance. And that's a feat that few writers can manage. And when you see Bud's recent work, which includes 2 stage plays and 3 novels just since the year 2000, you'll see that he's going as strong as ever, perhaps even more so. And so now it's my honor to welcome a man I personally believe will go down in history as one of the greatest writers to emerge from Texas. Ladies and gentlemen, Bud Shrake.
I want to thank everyone for coming here tonight. It really feels good to be in a room full of people. Thank you very much for coming here. I appreciate it. Ann Richards asked me one time if I had any deep-seated fears that had been with me my whole life that I couldn't shake. And I thought for a while, and I realized that, yeah, I was born in 1931, which was like very early in the Great Depression. And the sight of bread lines and of soup kitchens and of people coming up to our door in Fort Worth, knocking on the door and begging for food, all those things were like stamped into my circuits when I was very young. And so I told Ann, I said, yeah, one of the deep-seated fears I've always had is the fear of being destitute. Broke I've been a lot, but destitute not. And so I was afraid of that. And the other deep-seated fear I've always had, I told Ann, was making a fool out of myself. And Ann laughed and she said, well, you sure picked out a hell of a way to make a living. She said, because it's really hard to make any money writing, but making a fool out of yourself is the easiest thing in the world. At TCU, I was already, by the time I got into TCU, I was already working full-time at the Fort Worth Press and writing stories that appeared in the paper every day. If a day went by without my byline in the paper, I thought it was a wasted day. And I wanted to write a novel, So that's the thing I really want. I really set this goal for myself to write a novel by the time I was 28, because that's what Hemingway did and that's what Fitzgerald did. And I was very lucky at TCU that I had two of those great professors, the kind of teachers that stay with you your whole life, that you never forget their influence. One was Dr. Lorraine Shirley, who taught interrelation of the arts, how all these things fit together. And the other was a very elegant man named Dr. Paul Dinkins. And Dr. Dinkins taught the great novels, the great European novels. And we spent about a year and a half, I did in Dinkins' class, where Dinkins would sit on the edge of the desk and cross his legs and talk for an hour, and it would be fascinating. We spent like a year and a half on 3 books, on The Brothers Karamazov, which is the greatest murder mystery ever written, on War and Peace, which is the greatest historical novel ever written, and on a novel called The Magic Mountain, which is an investigation of the European soul as it leads up to World War II. And after going through these books like for a year and a half, I came out of there and I thought, well, I want to write a novel, but why bother? These guys have already done it. These are the great novels. And when I say great, I'm as careless as everybody else with using the word great. It was a great cheeseburger. It was a great baseball game last night. It was a great movie I saw last week. But when I talk about novels, when I say great, I'm very careful. And I apply great like to those 3 novels I was talking about. And I thought that, at the time, after studying these 3 novels, I thought, well, this is sort of like taking a young art student and taking him into the Sistine Chapel and say, you want to be a painter? Just do it like this guy did it. You'll be all right. And then, as I was wondering, I was kept on writing all these stories, of course, in the paper. And then Ernest Hemingway came to my rescue. The first 2 sentences of Sun Also Rises are, Robert Cohn was once middleweight boxing champion at Princeton. Do not think I am much impressed by that as a title, but it meant a great deal to Cohn. And I thought, that sounds like what I wrote in the press yesterday. It sounded exactly like one of my columns. I can write like that. And that was the great thing about Hemingway, because he made you feel like you could write as well as he did. And so I got to where I thought, I can't write as well as Hemingway. I'm not claiming that. But he made you want to try, made me want to try. And Fitzgerald came along about the same time. And I really appreciated Fitzgerald's youthful exuberance and the way he kind of overwrote everything. And then he read Hemingway and he learned how to write. And he wrote what is probably the great American novel, which is The Great Gatsby. And so I went back and tried to write myself in my own voice. And I thought of Hemingway, I would say, at that time as like the Perry Como of writers, because who among us of a certain age has not had 2 or 3 drinks and then sang, thought, well, I could sing as well as Perry Como, let me have a shot at Prisoner of Love and stand back. Another person who had, another writer who had at the same time as Hemingway and Fitzgerald, it was maybe a little later, Gary Cartwright and I were sitting at our desks one day in the Dallas Times-Herald, and here came walking through the thing Billy Lee Bramer and his wife Nadine. And Billy Lee had just published a novel called The Gay Place. And he had won the Houghton Mifflin Prize, which was a very big deal, very impressive. And the thing that got me, though, is I thought, well, and we went on with Billy Lee over to the press club that afternoon and had a bunch of drinks and talked. And the thing about it was that Billy Lee was writing about people that I knew. And he was writing about things at the Schultz Garden, and he was writing about politics. I'm sure all of you are familiar with that novel, so you know what it's about. But I mean, when Billy Lee walked through the press room, walked through the newspaper that day, I had already written one novel. It was a Western, and I thought, well, nobody probably in New York is going to be interested in my life or the people I know or what I'm doing. I have to write a Western. But I learned that from reading Billy Lee Bramer that that's not true, that people took Billy Lee seriously. And when you could write about the Schultz Garden and New York, people in New York did take it seriously. Fiction writing is a difficult thing to talk about because it's all comes from the human consciousness, and philosophy nor science, neither one have ever decided what human consciousness is or whether it even exists. And yet we know that as fiction writers, human consciousness is where you have your office. You know, that's where you go to work. And so I really don't talk about fiction writing very much, but because one thing, I don't know much about it. I do it by the seat of my pants. And I hear voices and I follow these guidelines. But there's two things that I have learned that I can tell anybody who wants to be a writer. In 50 some odd years of writing stories, I've learned two things. One is that action is character, and two is always use active verbs. And beyond that, you're on your own. I can, however, tell you the secret to a happy life. I got it from a fellow named Boudini Brown, Boudini was Muhammad Ali's companion, corner man, psychic coach. I think in the early days, in the 60s, when Ali was getting ready to fight Sonny Liston, who everybody was afraid of. I'll tell this one brief story about Sonny Liston. I was interviewing Sonny Liston in 1962 in a hotel in Chicago before he fought Floyd Patterson. And all the experts were saying that Floyd Patterson was the champion at that time. And Sonny Liston, they called him the Bear. He was a really ominous, sullen-looking guy who was the kind of guy that you didn't want to get too close to, even in any kind of polite situation. And so I was telling Liston how all the experts had said that Liston was too slow to catch Floyd Patterson, who was very fast. And they said, Liston will never catch up with him. Patterson will just cut him to pieces. And while I was telling Liston all this, we were in a hotel room, and it was in Chicago, no air conditioning. The windows were open, flies in the room and everything. And while we were talking, Liston kind of did like this. And when I got through with what I had to say, he stared at me with this baleful gaze, and then he opened his fist like this, and there was a housefly in there. And he said, "Is this fast enough to catch the skinny little son of a bitch?" So I knew then that this fight was over. It lasted one round, and then Liston fought him again and knocked him out in the first round again. But meanwhile, Boudini Brown, who was a tall black guy with a white stripe down his head, and he traveled the world, and he was a Jewish convert. He searched for knowledge all over the world, and he called himself the Black Moses. And he was the guy who came up with float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. The hands can't hit what the eyes can't see, and that became Muhammad Ali's mantra for the rest of his life. And that was certainly the psychological tool that helped him get in the ring with Liston, and it really screwed Liston up psychologically. But anyway, so Boudini Brown and I were sitting in a bar one day talking, and it was about 1967, and the world's in turmoil, and there were riots going on all over the country, the kind of riots that we would be having today if we had a draft. And we were talking about happiness, and Boudini said, he said, "You know, I have walked across Africa. I have climbed the mountains in India. I have consulted with the wizards in the jungles of Brazil, and I found the secret of happiness." And I said, "Really, where, what?" And he said, "I found it in a song by Johnny Mercer and Harold Arlen. And it goes like this: you have to accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, latch onto the affirmative, and don't mess with Mr. In Between." Thank you.